Hello, I'm David. Welcome to my channel Polyglot Reading, where I talk about books that are read in English, German, Italian, Yiddish or French. But don't worry about the languages. The video will be in English, and I only present books where at least an English translation is available, and I'll make the information available in the info section of the video. Today I was tagged by Hannah from Hannah's Books with the university tag that was developed by Joe Spivey, and this is my very first booktube tag, so I'm a little bit excited. So let's go right for the 9 questions. Question number 1. Etymologically, the word university is derived from the Latin universitas magistrorum et scholarium, meaning a community of teachers and scholars. What was the last book you read written by 2 or more writers in coordination? Actually, I would like to present 2 books. The first is the book Bonobo, The Forgotten Ape, by the authors Frans de Waal, who did the text as a biological scientist, and Frans Lanting, who did the photographs in this volume. I think this is a really fascinating volume. The bonobos are, among the apes, are our closest relatives, and they're so fascinating. They have such a rich social life, so many human-like forms of behavior. It's very interesting to learn about these close relatives of us by this very nice volume by Frans de Waal and Frans Lanting. The second book is also a cooperation of one author who was responsible for the text and another one for the pictures, but this time it's a comic book, but it's a very special sort of comic book. It's a history of the French literature. So this is a French book, L'incroyable histoire de la littérature française, so means the incredible history of the French literature. And I think this is really a great idea, producing a history of literature as a comic book. So I think this is the way that we should have been introduced to literature in school at mid-school level or as young adults. So this book, it picks 34 or 35 French authors from 5 centuries and gives about 10 pages for each of them, really as a comic. So telling their life from their infancy and their formative years, and also some fun facts, and explaining their major literary works and why they are important and how they are related to other works and to the main literary movements of that time. There's also usually 1 page per century that explains the major literary developments. So that's definitely not profound enough for an academic level, but at mid-school level, I think this is great, and it's a lot of fun to read through even as an adult. Second question. In the year 1088, the University of Bologna saw the advent of the university as we recognize it today. What is your favorite or most recently read novel set in Italy? Where to start? Italian is one of my favorite languages, so there are so many books written in Italy and set in Italy to pick from. Usually I talk about classics on this channel, but for this tag I've selected 2 more contemporary books. The first is a novel by Marco Balzano, Resto Qui, and there's an English translation available with the title I'm Staying Here, and it tells the story of a family in the northern part of Italy from the times of the First World War until more recent years in the 1960s. And this is an area that partly, for some part of the history, belonged also to Austria. There's a large minority in that part of the country that speaks German. It tells the story about the complications of life for a minority that is torn apart between the Austrian powers and the Italian powers. And when finally the country comes to Italy, this minority is not always treated well. And an example, which is also a very dominating part of the story, is that one of the valleys is planned to be flooded to build a hydroelectric reservoir. And so the inhabitants are forced to leave their homes. But the whole story isn't even told to them in the beginning. So there's just one announcement at the center of the village, and just an announcement in Italian. Although everybody knows that the majority of the population is not able to read or to understand Italian, or if so, only basic Italian, and not the administrative gibberish. And so they are treated very badly. And this book tells the story with a lot of empathy. And I think it's an important part of the Italian and of the European history that is described nicely in a very touching story in this novel, Resto qui di Marco Balzano. So another book that I like and that plays in Italy is the Italian book La solitudine dei numeri primi, written by Paolo Giordano, also translated into English under the title The Solitude of Prime Numbers. And it tells the story of two characters, Mattia and Alice, who both suffered a sort of traumatic experience in their childhood, and this is what draws them together. And so they have a sort of friendship during their childhood, adolescence, and into their adult years, but they always remain some sort of distance. They need each other, they cannot do without each other, but they cannot live together. So, and I think this is also what the author aims to reflect in the title, the solitude of prime numbers, like prime numbers who usually come as twins, but there's always at least one number in between them, so they can't get together. And that's also what is characteristic of the relation between Mattia and Alice. Very interesting and touching story. Let's move on to the third question. University study usually involves a significant change of residence or lifestyle. What is your favorite book focusing on an immediate change of residence or lifestyle? So now I would like to go back to the classics, and now to a real classic, to a book from ancient Rome. I would like to present the book Asinus Aureus, written by Apuleius. The English title would be the Golden Donkey, or the Golden Ass. And this is a very special book because from ancient Rome, it is the only novel written in Latin that is really preserved in its entirety. We know about a lot of other novels from ancient Rome, but all the others are fragments or incomplete. This is the only complete one. And it tells the story of a young man who tries to play with magic, and something goes wrong, and he's turned into a donkey. And then, so this is a change in lifestyle and in residence, because he's chased around, he's sold. He has to go through many adventures until finally he returns to his human form. So this is a very entertaining ancient novel, but you don't recognize that this is 2,000 years old. So it reads very fresh, and it's very entertaining to follow this young protagonist as a human and as a donkey, and then as a human back again. Highly recommended. Let's move on to the fourth question. The 21st century university student is expected to fork out tens of thousands in order to breach a university's sun-gold facilities. Name a book that cost you an exorbitant amount in exchange for little reward. Yeah, I would go for a definitely non-academic example. And what cost me an enormous amount of money with little reward is this 3 volumes edition of a manga called Alita. There's a story behind that. I usually don't read mangas, but I watched the film. You may have watched it as well, Alita Battle Angel. I very much like the aesthetics of the steampunk movement, and I also read some of the steampunk literature. And I watched this movie, Alita Battle Angel, and I was fascinated. I was fascinated. I liked it very much, and so I decided to go for the manga. that is the basis of this film. And it cost me a good deal of money, and it just turned out still mangas don't work for me. That's not my cup of tea. So I was a bit disappointed, but that's life. Okay, question number 5. Universities and their attached student unions boast innumerable societies that gather zealots of everything, from badminton to beard trimming to bardolatry. Name your favorite book that crafts or envisions a new or alternate society. Okay, for this question, I would like to go a few centuries back into 16th century France and present a book written by the French author Cyrano de Bergerac. I read it in the German translation because the French of the 16th century is quite hard to understand. So I think the English title of that would be the Travel to the Moon and to the Sun. There have been various translations also into English. And this is, the narrator describes a travel to the moon and to the sun, where he also describes alternate societies that embody all the liberties that one could not think of or not talk of in France of the author's day. So it's sort of a vision for a better future, also for the human society, but it comes under the disguise of a description of a travel to a lunar society and a solar society. A fun fact about this, I think this is the very first book in the European literature that mentions MP3 players and audiobooks. Not exactly with that terminology, but here the author describes that in one of those societies, that people have little gadgets in their ears that enable them to listen to books spoken by a human voice. So that's, I think, quite an interesting fun fact about this book from Cyrano de Bergerac. 6th question. What is your favorite novel set within the walls of a university campus? Right, that is clearly the novel Pnin, written by the Russian-American author Vladimir Nabokov. This is the German edition, because I read it, I think, 25 years ago, where my English was not that good that I could enjoy Nabokov's writing in the English original. It tells the story of an immigrant from Russia to the US, so somebody who flees for political reasons, and he tries to make a living by working as a professor for Russian language and literature at a provincial university in the US. And he's a very nice, a very well-meaning person, highly intelligent, but he appears to be very clumsy and silly and stupid just because he doesn't master the English language well. And so he has quite some difficulties to adapt to the American way of living, to the American way of organizing the academic education and way, and simply the American way of speaking and talking and expressing oneself. So this is an exhilarating story. It picks up on some of the autobiographical elements of Vladimir Nabokov, who himself fled from Russia in his early adulthood to escape from the Russian Revolution, and then had a quick stopover in Berlin, in Germany, for a few years, and then moved on to the US. And he actually mastered the English language quite well. After a few years in the US, he started to publish his novels in English. And this is his 4th novel written in English, I think. Okay, highly recommend that as a story about life on a university campus. Next question. Universities are touted as bastions of free thought and uninhibited expression. Name a book you've read that is produced by someone with whom you fundamentally disagree on the subject, but you like because of the eloquence with which it is written. I don't think I have a book of an author where I fundamentally disagree. So I'm a trained natural scientist, and some sort of disagreement is always part of the scientific process. So one disagrees usually on the way that a person interprets the data, and maybe that conclusion is not fully supported by the experimental evidence, and maybe on that point the author stretches the point too far. But fundamental disagreement is a rare thing. Same holds true for my private life, for my bookish life. I have a book, though, where I often disagree with the author, but I appreciate the book very much. And this is the book A History of Russian Literature by D.S. Mirsky. It's an important literature. It's an important history of Russian literature. Also, if one is interested in more secondary authors, more obscure authors of the first half of the 20th century. He is a very well-learned person, but I often disagree with his statements about the quality of certain authors or literary works. He sometimes is very apodictic. He just states, "Oh, this is an inferior novel," or "This is a very weak work," without explaining why, without justifying his judgment, without describing his quality criteria. And so I often found when I read some books that are mentioned in here, I found out that I disagreed with the author's judgment about the quality of some Russian authors or some Russian novels. But in general, I think this is an indispensable volume if you're interested in the history of the Russian literature, at least if you're interested in the more obscure authors, which are usually not treated with that level of detail in more contemporary histories of Russian literature. Okay, let's move on to the 8th question. Universities pride themselves on cherishing outpourings from previously silenced or oppressed minorities. Name a favorite book written by someone from an underrepresented group. I think that a very much underrepresented group, also here in booktube, are Yiddish writers and Yiddish literary classics. And this is the reason why I would like to present a classic in Yiddish language. It's the book Von Lublin bis New York, written by Katja Molodowski. She is considered to be one of the most important Yiddish poets of the 20th century. She wrote very little prose, but she wrote one book. It's a fictional diary of a young Jewish woman who flees her hometown in Poland because of the Nazi regime, and she comes to New York to live with her aunt and her uncle. And this is a diary of how she experiences this shift from provincial Poland to New York, and how she feels being ridiculed by her American relatives, who consider her a little bit very timid and primitive and with a bad clothing style. And in turn, she thinks that her American relatives are superficial and behave in a strange way. And so this describes her difficulties of becoming part of the American society in the form of a diary. It's written in a very simple Yiddish, I think, because this is realistic, like a young Jewish girl without an academic background or a literary training would have written her diary. So it's not the style of Katja Molodowski, how she writes her poems. It's very simple, which is good also for intermediate learners of Yiddish. And it's available as an English translation by, I think, the Indiana University Press, under the title A Jewish Refugee in New York. This is the Yiddish original, not an original printing from the 1940s when this were published. But I would like to point out the great work that the Yiddish Book Center in the US is doing. They preserve digitized versions of Yiddish literary classics, and you can order reprints of these books. And then you get these nice volumes in a high quality binding. in the university library style, close binding, gilt title on the spine. And it's not that costly to order these reprints from the Yiddish Book Center. I think they have a standard price of $48 per volume, independent of site, whether it's 100 pages or 600 pages. I think this is still a reasonable price for these nice hardbound reprints of Yiddish literary classics. Okay, let's move on to the 9th question. University study can be riddled with dense, impenetrable scholarly tomes. What is your favorite piece of interpretive nonfiction written by an academic? Okay, I'm not presenting any academic tomes of my own professional field of expertise, but something which is more related to my bookish interests, also in the humanities and philosophy. And so my favorite book is this book, Anatomy of the Sacred, An Introduction to Religion by James Livingston. So this is a more scientific approach to religion in general, not any specific religion. So it explains the methods of religious sciences, and it explains various features that we observe in many religions. So what is considered to be sacred in a religion? What role do rituals play? What role do sacred texts play? What different concepts are there about the transcendental, about an afterlife, and what function, what role do these different concepts have for religious societies? I found this very fascinating. You see that this is a quite worn edition. I like to read in this volume very often. I think this is really a very enlightening book and good approach to religion on this more abstract level, not dedicated to a specific religion and just one denomination, but to give you a more general picture about this important feature of human life and human societies and human culture. Also highly recommended. Okay, that's it. We made it. You finally got through the 9 questions. Thank you for watching until the end. I would like to thank again Hannah for tagging me, and thanks a lot to Joe Spivey for creating this fascinating tag. And I would like to tag 2 booktubers. The first would be Martina from Ima in the Books. She is an Italian booktuber, and I'm selecting her because I'm following her channel, I think, for more than 2 years by now. And I would like to see this tag also spill over into the Italian booktube niche or part. And for the same reason, I would like to tag also Thomas from the German channel Schundleser. I had some very interesting discussion also on some more academic topics, and I would like also to listen to his responses to these questions. And I think both of them are very fluent in English, would have no difficulties to understand these questions, to reply to them, maybe even in English. I don't know whether they will do that or whether they prefer to stick to the standard language of their channel, which is Italian for Martina and German for Thomas. Anyway, we will see. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end. I'll be happy to receive your comments in any of the languages that I mentioned, and I will try to reply in your language. Leave a comment here below. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye. Ciao and seid gesund.